I'm Justin Rizzo Weaver, Director of Operations at CAMA. As part of our CAMA at Home series of classical music content, I am delighted to be hosting our first celebrity interview with string bassist Chichi Nwanoku, who is one of the most celebrated string bassists in classical music today. She's a founding member of the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. That's a name familiar to many CAMA patrons from the orchestra's concert in the international series at the Granada Theatre in 2018. Chichi is also a trustee of the London Music Fund, which has funded opportunities for more than 10,000 children across London to learn to play musical instruments. She was awarded both the MBE in the 2001 Queen's Birthday Honours and the OBE for services to music. Chichi is the founder, artistic, and executive director of the Chineke Foundation, which provides career opportunities for both established and up-and-coming Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse classical musicians across the UK and Europe. In 2019, the Chineke Orchestra was the first ever recipient of the Royal Philharmonic Society's Game Changer Award. Additionally, Chichi has been an outspoken supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement, calling for institutional change to combat systemic racism in Britain and beyond. Without further ado, for today's installment of CAMA at Home, please welcome Chichi Nwanoku, celebrated string bassist and founder, artistic and executive director of the Chineke Foundation. Thank you so much for joining me, Chichi.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I was amazed by your story of how you came to study the string bass.
It felt like it chose me because even though I'd been involved with playing the recorder, and then when I got onto the piano at the age of 7, I was very passionate about it and worked really hard on right the way through my grades and everything. But athletics was my main forte that took all of my most of my attention outside of school was in training and competing. And then my passionate hobby was playing the piano. And so when I had this football injury, and my sprinting career was just curtailed in the split second. In fact, just before going into hospital, because I had to go into hospital for 2 weeks for the operation and the convalescing. And I knew that there was a school annual music competition, which I'd never tried to go into before because I just thought it was a weird thing to have a music competition where, the piano versus the bassoon versus the percussion, I was thinking it's like the 100 meters versus the pole vault. How can you? And so I had extra time to practice the piano at home while I was waiting to go into hospital. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll just do some extra piano practice and I'll have a go at this school music competition. I played Chopin and I won the competition, and I didn't think anything more about it because I'm used to winning things when I go through the finish line of the 100 meters, and so winning a piano competition, I couldn't see my competitors in the same sort of visceral way, so it wasn't as thrilling in a way. And so I went off to hospital for 2 weeks, came back, and literally as I was walking back into the school on my return to school, my head of music, John Dusek, fell into step with me and said, Chichi, the whole school's devastated. The headmistress and I, we've put our heads together. I mean, you've just won the school annual music competition. We think you're the most musical girl in the school. And we feel you could have a career in music if you took up a very unpopular orchestral instrument. Now, I had no idea what he was talking about. He took me to this little room in the school, and there stood 2 enormous double basses. And I said, but sir, I'm 5 foot nothing. Look at the size of me and look at the size of them. I'm the smallest girl in 6th form and they've got to be the largest instruments in the orchestra. And then he said, yes, but Chichi, when have you ever been put off by a challenge? And he said, and by the way, that competition that you won, the prize, because I didn't even stick around to see what the prize was, the prize is that the school pay for instrumental lessons on any instrument of your choice until you leave the school. Make use of that prize. And that a week later, I was having my first double bass lesson, and it was love at first sight.
What's been like the pinnacle for you?
I think the most memorable experience for me in my entire career was actually the first concert with the Chineke Orchestra. So I've played in all of the top concert halls in the world with incredible orchestras and conductors. And, you know, it's funny because it was when I walked onto the stage with bringing my Chineke orchestra onto the stage for our first concert on the September the 13th, 2015. 3 weeks before that first concert, we were told that we'd sold out. The Queen Elizabeth Hall, the South Bank Centre, had sold out for our first concert. And I was thinking, gosh, who has bought all of these tickets for this orchestra that's never existed before? And the Queen Elizabeth Hall, which is like the equivalent of the Alice Tully in New York, I've played literally hundreds of concerts there, and the audience always looks the same with a pretty similar response and very comfortable and very safe. And I'm at home there. That's my home hall, really. And to hear that we'd sold out with this brand new orchestra, so I was curious, and I knew all of my family were coming, my siblings, my nephews and nieces, my children. I knew that my book club were coming, and I knew all the press tickets had gone. So who had bought all these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other tickets? And you know what? When we walked onto that stage, I've never experienced this before. I walked onto that stage, that very familiar stage, and for the first time in my 35-year career, I looked at an audience that looked like the community. And not only that, they rose to their feet. And I'm talking about every colour, every ethnicity, every age. It was not just about ethnicity. Whole families come, and they come to have a great time. And what was so moving, people, particularly the people of ethnicity that were in the audience, many of whom lived in the vicinity of the South Bank Centre in London, you know, maybe half a mile away, a mile or two, where they can just hop on a bus and get there in no time at all. And yet they've never even stepped inside the South Bank Centre before, let alone inside the hall for a concert, because of historical brainwashing that classical music is not for people like them, and that they would not understand it or enjoy it. It would be over their head, far too highbrow, and they wouldn't understand it and they wouldn't enjoy it. And, you know, so basically these people have felt that those doors have been closed to them, that they were not really invited or welcomed in. One of the promises I've made to the Chineke organisation is that every single concert we play, we include a piece of music written by a composer of relative ethnicity that can stand alongside Beethoven, Sibelius, Brahms, etc., and that we all learn about somebody else. I mean, 62 of us walked onto that stage for the first concert, 31 nationalities amongst us. You know, I'm Nigerian, Irish, born in London, you know, so we've got so many mixtures in the orchestra. There's well over 40 nationalities now. So we opened with the Ballade in A minor by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, and it just lifted the roof. I had found descendants of the Coleridge Taylor family in the audience. The emotion was just bubbling over for everyone, not just me or, you know, other members of the orchestra, but I saw people in the audience crying when we came on. People I've never seen before had tears coming down their faces. And when we started rehearsing the Coleridge Taylor, it's a wonderful overture, it's so uplifting. The 62 of us in the room, none of us had played his music before. This is a British composer, contemporary of Vaughan Williams and Gustav Holst, etc. None of us had played his music. None of us had studied his music. We weren't taught about him at school or at conservatory. Nothing. So this was emotional in itself, because this was wonderful music. We all fell in love with it. It was the earworm that was going around the whole week during the rehearsals. Everybody was just singing. You could just hear the theme, you know, because we were all singing that piece. We couldn't stop. And then the second piece we played was a short elegy by a living Black British composer called Philip Herbert, because I felt it would be so good for all of that audience, which included the likes of the heads of the BBC and all of these people in the know, as well as the people who are not in the know. And because at the end of that elegy, we bought the composer to take a bow on the stage. We brought him up onto the stage. So all of that audience saw a living black composer, which they hadn't seen before. So everybody's mind and perceptions were being changed all the way through that concert. And then we played Brahms, Haydn Variations, interval, Beethoven Symphony Number 7, and everybody stayed right to the end. And then we got an encore. So we played the conductor said, should we just play the so-and-so movement of the Beethoven? I said, no, people have heard the Beethoven hundreds of times. No one's ever heard the Coleridge Taylor before. Let's play the Coleridge Taylor. And so we did. And it just took the roof off. And I bumped into Jon Snow, who's a really very famous newsreader on Channel 4 News on TV, about 4 or 5 months after that concert. And he said to me, Chichi, I was in the audience of that first concert of yours, and I was one of those people standing up as you came on, and I was crying like everybody else. And that was so moving.
Of course, what do you think helped you overcome the very obvious barriers that exist for, Black, Asian, and people from ethnically diverse cultural backgrounds getting to the position that you find yourself in?
My Nigerian father, Igbo father, and Southern Irish mother, who had everything possible was put in front of them to try to divide them, because society did not want to see mixed marriages in the mid-50s when they met. And even then, when they were trying to find a roof over their heads, to a room to live in, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish were very common signs that you saw on shops, on pubs, on rooms to rent. You were allowed to say no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And so my parents, because they had such a good sense of humor, they'd say, well, we haven't got a dog, 2 out of 3. Let's knock on the door and see and try and convince them to let us come and move in here. And we had these incredible parents whose hearts were so open, who trusted their children right from day one, and just taught us that we could be anything that we could be. And maybe naively said, look, hard work and perseverance, there's nothing that you can't do.
The Chineke Foundation's motto is championing change and celebrating diversity in classical music. And I was going to ask you if you'd seen measurable progress as you would measure it since the foundation's creation in 2015.
What I do know has changed is the conversation, the narrative. All of the orchestras, the chief executives who speak to me and invite me for a coffee to have a chat and see, because most of the London orchestras don't have a single black person on their board, in their management, in the orchestra, or the repertoire they play. It's a tough place we're starting from. It's something like 1.6% of representation of ethnicity in the orchestras in the UK, which is quite small. Mind you, in the States, it's only 1.8%, which surprises me. 3 of our players have won jobs in orchestras since the start of Chineke, which is great. And a lot of, because we have a sister organisation, the Chineke Junior Orchestra, and the juniors played their first concert a couple of hours before ours in the South Bank Centre. They just played in the Claw Ballroom, which is the great big foyer at the Royal Festival Hall, so people could watch it free of charge. Just fantastic. What happened on the very first day of rehearsals? Walking into that room with all of those musicians, no 2 people knew each other, okay? Apart from the Cane Mason family, because there's 7 kids in that family, no 2 people knew each other. It's like divide and rule, really. And I think the blacks' experience in the UK historically is very different from the blacks' experience in the US, where hundreds and thousands were taken on ships to work on plantations and things like that in the US. In England, it was a different story, where there would be single slave in single households. So they were not in a group, they were not in a network as they were in America. And so we in the UK are not so familiar with having a black network, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
And so when I had decided what I was going to do with creating this orchestra, and it was government, the British government, the culture minister was calling me into Westminster to say, Chichi, why do we only ever see you regularly on the international concert platform? And what he meant was the only black person on stage in a classical orchestra in one of the top orchestras. And so that's when it started, really, when I knew that I would have the support of government, etc.
Well,
Um,
let's talk a little bit about what underpins that. I mean, what kinds of discrimination do Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse musicians experience in the classical music industry that you'd like the public to be more aware of?
for a start, most orchestras don't use a screen for auditions, and we there's a big tradition of getting your friends in,
Hmm.
friends and family, especially freelance orchestras. Most of our orchestras are freelance, made up of freelance musicians. Even the London Symphony Orchestra is a freelance orchestra. The BBC orchestras are contracted. The Royal Opera House Covent Garden is contracted. The City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, they are contracted orchestras. But most of the other orchestras in the country are freelance, including the London Symphony.
Hmm.
And only within the last year have they started using screens only for the first round.
Wow.
And some of the information I've heard from some of my friends in some of these top orchestras, when they've started to try out having a screen. I'll give you an example without giving any names.
No, of course, yeah.
Okay, I'm just saying it's a top orchestra. They were doing auditions to find a guest principal for one of the string sections. They wanted a guest principal player, solo player. So they decided to do that first round of auditions with a screen.
Hmm.
And at that point, everybody who's doing the audition is just a number. There's no names. So you don't know who's behind that screen. And it's quite a big panel. I think 9 people were on that panel. Once they'd narrowed it down to that group of 9 that got 11 that got the highest votes. So then they were able to see the names of those people. And one particular person said, "Oh, but so and so didn't get through." Somebody who they knew was doing an audition,
Hmm.
a friend of theirs, okay? And they said, "Oh, but so and so hasn't got through to the next round." And everyone said, "Yeah, it seems that they haven't got through to the next round." And this person said, "Oh, well, we must invite them as a guest principal." And they said, "What do you mean?" No, but nobody voted for that. Nobody gave that person a vote.
Uh-huh.
Not just one vote, but nobody gave that person a vote. And he said, "Yeah, but I mean, this is a great player. We must." Yeah, no, but even you didn't vote for their playing, and that's what's been happening historically. People get their friends in, and it's a shock when they learn something that way.
It's interesting too because I'm sure you've read Anthony Tomasini's article, which is now
Yes.
now very famous, where he suggested just the opposite, that perhaps screens have become a barrier to having more diverse representation in orchestras in the United States, and of course a lot of controversy came in the wake of that
Well,
article.
I had a long talk with Anthony McGill after that article because, Anthony has won all of his positions without being seen, principal positions. And all of my Black American colleagues have won their jobs, mainly principal positions, without being seen. Like Billy Hunter, the principal trumpet at the New York Met. Damari McGill, Anthony's brother, principal flute in Seattle. Andrew Brady, principal bassoon at Atlanta, and Anthony McGill, winning principal clarinet at the New York Met. He's now at the New York Philharmonic. He just won the Avery Fisher Award.
Wonderful.
But he called me and we had a long talk on the phone, literally the day after that article came out. And I said, "So Anthony, you seem a little bit in the middle now about this, when you know that you won your job because you weren't seen. They've all done jobs where the barrier is curtain is taken away for the final round, and none of them have won that position after that."
Once the curtain came down, yeah.
As soon as the curtain came down, they get eliminated. What we would love to see are organizations making a commitment to EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion,
Hmm.
so that the organization itself signs up to Yes, we really want to diversify our organisation. So they are ready. They've done the groundwork. I've seen it happen so many times in other organisations where they think, oh, we better bring someone in of colour, you know, because otherwise it looks like we're not being very inclusive.
Right.
So they'll bring somebody in. That person is being brought in because they've got colour, and the organisation is not really particularly welcoming. They haven't done their groundwork. And that person of colour thinks, I'm only here. Why are they not being very welcoming? You know, why am I feeling uncomfortable here? And I know I've got colleagues who've said this to me. They've been told you're only here because you're the token.
Right.
And eventually that black person leaves. That's where we are at the moment. So organisations really need to work on what they're going to do for their to sort get their groundwork so the culture in the organisation wants to diversify. There's a terrible fear of loss of power, and I think the thought of losing power, I think, is the biggest fear about diversification, because I feel that people feel if they lose power, they will lose money and they will lose so many other things. But I think those fears are ungrounded, really.
Yes.
People shouldn't be afraid of this, because we all know that if power and wealth is more equally shared, everyone will benefit. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I know that when you create something from scratch, as I did, I could just do it right from the start. And I know that a lot of these orchestras, which are more than 100 years old, they can't change their whole culture overnight. And I know that. I'm not expecting them to change overnight, but I want to see them starting to make the wheels are creaking, but they're starting to take on board. You know, and I've encouraged all of the orchestras at South Bank that in October, which is Black History Month in England, I know yours is in
February.
between us, our concerts in October, we're going to be playing 23 composers of colour. So not just us, but I've said to the South Bank, you need to insist that it's not just the Chineke Orchestra that brings this music to your South Bank Centre. Hold the other orchestras accountable.
To talk a little bit about the roles of presenters and what can we do to play our part as a presenter regarding bringing about a fair and more equitable world, you know, specifically on the path to equitable representation for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, ethnically diverse musicians.
Most music, arts organisations in the country where we receive some government funding, and the government are now demanding that all the orchestras, what are they doing? They have to show what they're doing for diversity, but the thing is, they're still. I think they need to be held accountable because things haven't really changed very much. I think the next buck should stop with the presenters. And it's one of the things I talked to at the South Bank meetings. And I said, look at what's just happened in the United States when George Floyd was murdered.
Sure.
And people were saying, well, why is everyone talking about it now? Because, these things have been going on since time. The world has been moving slower in a way because we've all been trapped at home. And so the world stopped and saw that slow murder. I think coupled with lockdown and that murder, it was like a perfect storm. And that's why I think now everyone's woken up to, no, this is enough now. We've got to stop. This has got to stop. And one of the things I said to the South Bank and the orchestras was that, guys, for the last nearly 5 years, you've all watched me and the Chineke Orchestra presenting the programs we're presenting with all the players that you've seen our reviews, you've seen, what's happening. And why are you all leaving it to us to be the only organisation diversifying what's going on the classical concerts in the South Bank? And I asked the South Bank directly in private meetings, can you not hold these organisations accountable? In the Manhattan School of Music, for example, I was so impressed. They have said every single student concert has to include a piece of music that's written by an African-American composer, which means every student has to go find and do their own research. It's fantastic. If everybody did this, things could change so quickly.
This is a great time to ask, what Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse classical musicians should CAMA, as a presenter, be looking to program in the coming years so we can be part of the solution of increasing representation?
But apart from us, there's fantastic repertoire from, look at your William Dawson, incredible Black American composer. He wrote one symphony that was premiered in New York. Stokowski, I think, was conducting. It brought the house down. And the composer was called back onto the stage over and over and over and over again. Really, he should have been an overnight sensation. And because of his ethnicity, he wasn't supported properly. He never wrote another symphony after that. Symphony number 1 by William Dawson, incredible piece of music. And then you've got Florence Price, you've got William Grant Still, you've got Scott Joplin, you've got people who had to go into different genres because they were not being allowed to come through as a pure classical musician. Like Nina Simone, a classically trained pianist. She couldn't find a way in. But there are people there. You've got Valerie Coleman. You've got John Wineglass, 2 incredible composers, and Jesse Montgomery. You've got George Lewis. You've got Adolphus Hailstork, living composers in America.
That assumption that perhaps we don't have a choice or an ability to speak up when repertoire isn't diverse, that's maybe an assumption that we could challenge.
You're giving the orchestra autonomy, and I think you could at least start by saying, right, in February, everybody who plays here has to show their commitment to, so they need to introduce either a soloist, a conductor, or a symphonic work by a composer of ethnicity.
We tend to go out and look for certain types of talent to fill out our recital and chamber music series. And that seems like a playing field where there could be a lot of good work done.
Have you heard of Joel Thompson? This score here is 7 Last Words of the Unarmed, an incredible piece of music. He's an incredible African-American composer. We've got the great canon with the Beethoven, the Brahms, the Shostakovich, the Schubert, the Sibelius, etc. All these wonderful pieces, Mozart, Bach, over and over and over and over and over again. And they form the great canon. And people like to do things in the image of themselves. I know that's part of human nature. And most of my career, I was the odd one out, always the odd one out. And I just played whatever my orchestra was playing. I didn't have a say. And was taught that was the status quo, and, be comfortable with that. And I never kicked up against it. I never ever said, I never argued with it really until I had the courage and the experience behind me that I could say, well, I'm just going to do something about it rather than complain. And, it's funny because the minute I did, one of the questions that some people say to me is, so Chichi, are you a racist now? You with your black orchestra? That's what people say to me. And I say, hang on a minute. Actually, I'm glad you've asked me that question. Mm-hmm. Because let me just tell you, it's not just a black orchestra. That this majority, black, Asian and ethnically diverse, but there are white people fighting to play in our orchestra who play with our orchestra and the junior orchestra. And plus, when you say that to me, do you ever stop for a single second and think how I've felt looking at your orchestras for 35 years, where that's supposed to be the status quo? And that's okay, is it? I've never ever said, oh, you're such a racist orchestra, it's all white. And, why should that be the norm? Is it as though that saying that the status quo white orchestras are the norm and that anything else is something wrong with it? That's not right. And I'm absolutely committed to showcasing all of those incredibly talented, underrepresented musicians. Some already established professionals who hardly have had a look in their whole careers, and all those up-and-coming youngsters who know that they've got me behind them now and they've got Chineke behind them. They are going to have a career in classical music. And all those juniors, they're so connected with each other now, and it's something that's going to happen. And one of the beautiful things about the orchestra is that nobody is the odd one out. Even the white people in the orchestra, they don't feel like the odd one out because they're made. And some of my freelance friends who've come from the London Symphony, wherever they've come, they say, Chichi, I thought I would feel unwelcome, because I was so in the minority, but I've never been made to feel more welcome in the Chineke Orchestra than I have in any other orchestra in my entire career.
Yeah, I can already see what a powerful an impact an organization like Chineke Foundation and the orchestra can have.
Well, there needs to be a Chineke in every country.
Yeah.
It's so important, and when I sit on boards and I'm the only black person, I say, look, this is my point of view. I can only speak for myself. You need to diversify your management and other parts of the organization. It's not okay that I'm just the only person of color here. And don't only ask me to find the other people of color. You all got to go look for them as well,
Yeah.
because we're missing out on a lot of people with huge talent.
It's incredible.
There's so many people out there. We've got some incredible junior players coming through, some astonishing players, and some incredible young professionals in the orchestra who are now going for it, because they feel that they've got a sort of a body of support from the Chineke organization. Because one of the things I do, I always have at least one junior player in every section of the orchestra. Someone who's Sheku, when he first played with the professional orchestra, he was 16, but I knew there's nothing he couldn't do. So he was sitting number 4 cello in the professional orchestra. He was principal cello of the junior orchestra, but number 4 in the professional orchestra. And his brother was in the violin section. Brymer was 17 or 18, and they're learning. They're surrounded by professionals. And so these juniors, they're all being supported by the professionals around them who look like them. And it's the first time in their career that all these juniors have been mentored by someone that looks like them. And people have said to me, "Oh, you're only as good as your worst player." And I say, "Yeah, well, that is a thing." But what people experience with Chineke concerts, even if we have got a student there, the energy in our concerts, it's so palpable. And I find that we are pulling people up rather than us being pulled down, if you see what I mean. And when people say, so Chineke is an orchestra, they say, well, I can't just say it's just an orchestra, because when I think about, you remember that I told you about the first audience?
Yes.
And every audience that we attract, there are people who've been told they shouldn't be going to classical music because they won't understand it, they're too stupid. And just to see the faces and the reaction from all these people that come to our concerts, what it means for them, where they, at the end, they feel so uplifted. They feel, because they've heard, classical music is so highbrow, you've got to be able to read music and play an instrument to this high level. There's, a lot of hard work does go into every single player. So when I describe Chineke, we have had such an impact on the society, because you'll see black and white sitting next to each other right through the audience. It's just gorgeous. And the buzz coming off the audience, and what it does to us, it's like this two-way buzz going on. And I say that Chineke it's had social impact. It's had psychological impact.
Yes.
It's had uplifting impact. It's had, all of these impacts, and we're an orchestra.
Thank you, Chichi, for joining us.
Yeah.
This has been the first interview in this series that we're putting together. I knew that this one needed to come first. It's the issues are so important and so relevant, and what you shared today didn't disappoint in the least.
I hope it gets you off to a good start. And I really mean everything. We were so sad. I mean, I was just in pieces, gutted when this happened, when it all came to a stop. After all the work going into making this tour happen.
We smelled it coming, but we didn't know how dark the stages would go, how deep the crisis would go. But, I wish you all the best in continuing to achieve your mission deeper and deeper. And I know that we'll see you on a stage in Santa Barbara on a future tour. So until then.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Chichi. Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And thank you to all of you watching this first interview feature for CAMA at Home. I'm Justin Rizzo Weaver, wishing you good health and great music. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like this video and subscribe to CAMA's YouTube channel for future CAMA at Home content.